The Corvette, Chevy, and Camaro typically are the cars that get all of the recognition when we're talking about the holy grail of GM performance products in the late 60s to early 70s. But there was another option in the GM catalog from 1970 to 1971 that seemed to fly under the radar in period and throughout history. But it was a serious performance contender with a personal luxury twist that the other bow-tie bruisers didn't offer. It was the muscle car for middle management and the sophisticated choice for those who wanted Chevelle performance out of a well-appointed driver. It was the 1970 to 1971 Monte Carlo SS 454. Now, believe it or not, the inception of the Monte Carlo SS all started with the 1958 Ford Thunderbird many years earlier, which ditched its sporty two-seat setup for a more luxurious four-seat layout, and it sold like hotcakes. It was Chevrolet's velvet hammer, the Monte Carlo SS 454, and for a brief shining moment, it gave middle management something the other GM muscle cars didn't: performance wrapped in sophistication. The Monte Carlo wasn't meant to scream at you. It was built to whisper, with the kind of authority that made you lean in closer, only to realize it was packing 454 cubic inches of fury under a 6-foot hood. This was the gentleman's muscle car, and yet history let it slip into the shadows. But today, we're pulling it back into the light, because the story of the 1970 to 1971 Monte Carlo SS 454 isn't just about horsepower. It's about the rare moment when muscle and luxury collided. To understand how the Monte Carlo came to be, we have to rewind a bit. Not to Chevrolet, but to Ford. Back in 1958, Ford made a bold move with the Thunderbird. They transformed it from a sporty two-seat roadster into a more luxurious four-seat personal coupe. Critics were skeptical at first, but the public ate it up. Sales skyrocketed, and suddenly every major brand wanted a slice of this stylish, upscale market. By the mid to late 60s, the streets were lined with big, glamorous coupes. Buick had the Riviera, Oldsmobile rolled out the Toronado, Pontiac scored a smash hit with the Grand Prix. These weren't just cars, they were rolling status symbols. And Chevrolet, the people's brand, was left standing on the sidelines. They needed a player in the game. Enter the Monte Carlo. Conceived under Chevrolet's general manager Pete Estes, the car was initially codenamed Concourse. But when Estes moved on, it was none other than John DeLorean. Yes, that John DeLorean, who pushed the project across the finish line. The same man who gave us the GTO and later the gull-winged Back to the Future legend now turned his attention to giving Chevy a dose of upscale swagger. And in the fall of 1969, the Monte Carlo was born. Right from the start, it made a statement: a 6-foot-long hood, concealed wipers, chrome trim that could make a Buick jealous. This was not a Camaro in a tuxedo. It had its own presence, built on a stretched version of the A-body platform it shared with the Chevelle 4-door. Chevy marketed it with a simple promise: a lot of luxury, a lot of performance, and a lot of value. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Even the base Monte Carlo wasn't a slouch. Every model came with a V8, no straight-six cheap seats here. The entry-level engine was a 350 cubic inch small block, pushing 250 horsepower, with options stepping up through a 300-horse 350, a 400 small block, or even a 402 with 330 horsepower. If you wanted a manual, the 4-speed M20 was available, though many went for automatics like the 2-speed Powerglide or the tougher Turbo Hydromatic. The Monte Carlo was flexible, part cruiser, part boulevard bruiser. But there was one box on the order sheet that changed everything. Officially RPO Z20, this option transformed the gentleman's coupe into a luxury-wrapped missile. At the heart of it was the LS5 454 cubic inch big block, conservatively rated at 360 horsepower and a tire-melting 500 pound-feet of torque. Real-world numbers suggested it was closer to 400 horsepower, and Motor Trend tested it at 0 to 60 in 7 seconds flat, with a quarter mile in the low 15s at 92 miles per hour. Not bad for a nearly 2-ton luxury car with simulated wood trim and an electric clock. It was Chevelle SS Performance wearing a tailored suit. Backing that monster engine was the legendary Turbo Hydromatic 400, a 3-speed automatic that was as smooth as it was tough. No manual was offered, despite rumors in some sales literature, but honestly, the TH400 didn't need a partner. It could handle everything the LS5 threw at it. To keep all that torque under control, Chevy beefed up the driveline with a 12-bolt rear axle and a 3.31 final drive ratio with positraction as an option. Some early cars even came with highway-friendly 2.56 gears, which hurt their quarter-mile times but made for effortless cruising. By 1971, Chevy standardized the shorter 3.31 gears for better punch. But raw power wasn't the only trick the Monte Carlo SS had up its sleeve. Chevy engineers made sure it could handle too, outfitting it with the F41 performance suspension. This meant heavy-duty springs and shocks, boxed rear control arms, frame stiffeners, and fat anti-roll bars, 1.125 inches up front and 0.88 inches in the rear. They even added the G67 automatic level control suspension, a vacuum-operated air shock system that kept the car level no matter how much luggage or golf clubs you stuffed in the trunk. Brakes were upgraded to 11-inch front discs with single-piston calipers, while the rear kept 9.5-inch drums. Not exactly track-ready by modern standards, but solid for the time, especially paired with G70-15 tires on steel wheels with turbine covers. If you wanted more flash, you could tick the box for 15x7 rally wheels. Visually, the SS454 was a masterclass in understatement. No wild stripes, no hood scoops, just a subtle SS454 badge tucked into the rocker trim, and on 1971 models, a small SS emblem on the rear panel. You had to know what you were looking for, and that was part of its charm. While Camaros and Chevelles were shouting for attention, the Monte Carlo SS whispered. And sometimes that whisper carried more weight. The SS returned in 1971, but the tide was already turning. Compression ratios dropped from 10.25 to 1 to 8.5 to 1 thanks to looming emissions regulations and unleaded gasoline. Horsepower ratings held at 360 on paper, but performance was beginning to soften. Styling changes were minor. A new grille with fewer vertical bars, rectangular parking lamps, squared-off headlight bezels, and rally wheels as standard equipment. But sales told the story. Just 3,800 SS454s were sold in 1970 and only 1,900 in 1971. Out of over 145,000 Monte Carlos built in 1970, the SS was a rare bird. Why so few? Maybe it was too subtle for its own good. Maybe performance buyers went straight to the Chevelle SS for the same 454 in a lighter, cheaper package. Or maybe those who wanted luxury leaned toward Buick or Pontiac instead. Whatever the reason, the Monte Carlo SS454 slipped through the cracks, bowing out after just 2 model years before the muscle car era gave way to the malaise years. But here's the thing. In period, it was an incredible value. A base Monte Carlo started around $3,100 and adding the SS package brought you to about $3,500. Even with options, most cars topped out in the $4,000 range, and for that, you got luxury, presence, and big block muscle in one package. Motor Trend praised it when they tested it against rivals like the Thunderbird and Grand Prix, calling it the best blend of performance, comfort, and value. It was the muscle car for grown-ups, the one you could drive to a boardroom in the morning and still roast tires on your way home. And that's what makes the story of the Monte Carlo SS454 so fascinating. It was a rare moment when Chevrolet built something that lived in 2 worlds at once. Big block muscle and personal luxury, brute strength and quiet refinement, raw torque wrapped in wood trim. It wasn't the star of the show, but it was the kind of car you remember years later because it didn't just make noise. It made an impression. The Monte Carlo SS454 was a car that carried itself differently. Unlike the Chevelle, which wore its muscle proudly, or the Camaro, which begged for attention, the Monte Carlo played it cool. It was the kind of car that didn't have to prove itself at every stoplight because it knew what it was capable of. And maybe that was its greatest strength, but also its downfall. In an era where brashness and visual aggression sold cars, subtlety often got overlooked. The Monte Carlo SS was a car for those who wanted to blend in without giving up the thrill of a big block heartbeat under the hood. It was for the man in the gray suit, the middle manager, the executive who wanted to drive something powerful but didn't want his neighbors whispering about how loud his car looked. In short, it was sophistication fused with muscle, a rare formula in the golden age of performance. As the 1970s rolled on, the writing on the wall became clearer. Emissions regulations tightened, insurance premiums for high-performance cars skyrocketed, and fuel economy suddenly mattered more than quarter-mile times. The Monte Carlo SS454 was caught in this squeeze. Its big block V8, once a badge of pride, now seemed like a liability in a world being reshaped by oil crises and new government standards. By 1972, the SS454 option had quietly disappeared, and Chevrolet moved the Monte Carlo further into the luxury lane. The days of subtle big block power cloaked in refinement were gone. But here's the irony. What made the SS454 fade in its time is exactly what makes it so special today. With only 3,800 units sold in 1970 and 1,900 in 1971, fewer than 6,000 were ever built. Compare that to hundreds of thousands of Camaros and Chevelles from the same period, and you realize just how rare this car truly is. While everyone was chasing the spotlight, the Monte Carlo SS lived in the shadows. And now that rarity makes it a hidden gem for collectors. It's not the first car people think of when they hear muscle, but among enthusiasts who know, it's regarded as one of the coolest sleeper muscle cars of the era.